So welcome, Gopi. Welcome to both of us as we're trying to put this as an experiment of co-sensing, co-discovery for our mindfulness base camp. Welcome.
Thank you, Hemant. I mean, always a pleasure to have a chat with you. And yeah, I feel like really special that we've been able to create something, or at least attempt to create something. And this is an exciting first step.
Yes, yes, Gopi. I generally, I'm mindful of the fact that a couple of my earlier interactions that I've had with people, they've cautioned me that, we should be careful when we're trying to connect the dots in the hindsight, because that could be. Oh, sorry, I think the video is just frozen. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, you just froze for a moment, and then there was a lot of static, and then I just got kicked out.
Now, yes, time for mindfulness to kick in.
Oh yes, I can tell you this. I mean, Zoom is a great way to test your awareness levels, patience levels, mindfulness levels.
Yes,
it happens to me all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely, Gopi. So I was just trying to put this across that in the past when I've had interactions with people, and a couple of them have really warned me that it's good to talk about your teenage years, your child years, but know one thing, that you're only connecting the dots in the hindsight. So so I'm mindful of that. But so be it. What I was curious is, I listened into some of your conversations, Gopi, wonderful interactions you've had with a bunch of wonderful souls on the planet. And in one particular interaction with Kelly Brazier, you interestingly talked about one of the memories that you have of childhood when you were 5, and your grandfather took this decision to go towards a monastic life. And I was curious to know what was the narrative that you can remember you had, or your parents shared with you at that time. And by narrative, I don't mean it to be in a negative sense. It's just an explanation. And have you thought about it over the years? And are you having a different narrative or different integration of it now?
Memory is a dangerous thing, Hemant. And I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm blessed with a good one. Other times I feel like I'm cursed with a good one. I guess it really depends on what you remember. My early memories actually are of me in the cradle. And I actually even remember the toys that used to be hung and would be swirling around. And when I grew up and I started telling my mom or asking her, did I have this? And initially, they were quite shocked that my memory went back that far. But interestingly, I can also forget, what someone said to me yesterday. So it's a beautiful thing that we are blessed with something like that. So Dad's father was, a government servant in Thiruvannamalai, and was also a believer, disciple of one of the great souls that has come from the same city, same town, Ramana Maharishi. And interestingly, my early memories of him are just about, as a human being, as an old man, kind, gentle chap who liked spending time with me. My first few words of English that I could share with him. But it's really only over time that this narrative, actually, as you call it, started taking shape for me. It's like, reading a book. You read it for the first time, it has a certain impression. And then we all have these books we've read dozens of times, and they've grown on us over the years, and then they come to mean something else. And I think this is exactly what happened, with him, and how he went from just being, Tata and uh, a regular old man to then stand for and embody something that I started seeking. And that transition or that narrative, I think, shaped over maybe 30 something years through stories of him as I was growing up, both good and not so great stories, like there are about each one of us. And at some point, these stories started forming a little bit of a pattern for me. And the one thing that I was ultimately really inspired by was his choice to take sannyas. And so it happens that, you know, we were living in Hyderabad, and he had two sons, my dad, and we were living in Hyderabad, and his other son and family were living in Madras, what was Madras at that time. And used to spend some time here and then travel to Madras. And so dad put him on a train here in Hyderabad, and he never got there to Madras. And in those days, there was no mobile, and well, there weren't even regular phones. So there was a little bit of panic, some, you know, trunk calls, if you remember what those things were, got placed, and, you know, there was some phone conversation. But at the end of it, nobody could do anything. And a few days later, we received a telegram or a postcard, I think it was, that said, you know, that he had made his choices and to not come looking for it. So my dad promptly looked at the postmark there, which said Rishikesh, and took the next train to go and look for him. And fortunately for both, he was never found. I think the story would have had a very different, probably less interesting ending if it had gone any other way. So that was a landmark kind of moment when it happened for the whole family. And for me, that event just stayed as an event. But then as you know, other kind of dots connected about the kind of person he was. And I think it was somewhere around in my, you know, mid to late 30s that I actually started understanding perhaps what made him make that choice. And then getting inspired by that degree of detachment and the courage to make that choice. Scaring my family at times that, you know, I might end up doing something like that. And so eventually it was, I think, in 2015 or 2016, somewhere around that time, that you know, I was on one of my monastic stints in the Himalayas, and I decided to spend some time looking for him, not literally, but metaphorically. Literally, if he had been alive, he would have been 115 years old. So yes, while I did keep my eye open for extremely old people, I think I was like really more interested in the notion of my grandfather that I developed, a very kind, wise man who spoke very little, spoke sense when he did, and who had this wonderful degree of detachment. I think when he walked away, I think all his worldly possessions were in one little suitcase, and that's all he had. So ideas around simplicity, detachment, wisdom, minimalism, kindness, gentleness. This is what he started to embody for me, and then, you know, that's really what has kind of stuck with me. I don't know whether one needs to really take sannyas to get that, but that you have all of that, I think, certainly points you in that direction. So I think, I mean, I certainly see a connection between the two. It's not necessary that you have to walk away in order to find those things. You can find them in everyday life, but you find them to a certain large degree, and they do change you as a person.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this. Beautiful.
No, thank you for asking.
I am reminded once I was with this gentleman who walks for peace. He calls his mission as a peace pilgrimager. So he walks from one place to another. And I was sitting with him, and he talked about a story about Gandhi. Apparently, somebody came to Gandhi. So somebody who used to do a lot of meditation practices on the mountains and would
Mhm.
literally reside out of the mountains. Once in a while, the person would come down and just be there in the Delhi region. And once he happened to meet Gandhi, and when he met Gandhi, apparently he told him, what are you doing here? You need not be here. You need to be there."
Mm.
So there are two versions to what happens next. One
Mhm.
version says that Gandhi said, "No, precisely because of that, I need to be here."
Mhm.
And the other version is where Gandhi says, "You know what? There aren't thumb rules. Nobody
Mhm.
can really dictate. We can all judge each other's such actions, but
Mhm.
ultimately it's on the person, what the person is going through and is really churning inside, that decides that." So, yeah.
Lovely, lovely. Hemant, this reminds me of a beautiful Zen saying that says that the only Zen that is there at the top of a mountain is the Zen that you bring there.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Lovely. No, thank you for sharing that little anecdote.
Yeah. Um, Taking this further, Gopi, I'm also fascinated. You mentioned in some of your interviews about your writer-teacher parents and how you were homeschooled, and that gave you a foundation for curiosity, pondering questions, as opposed to propositional knowing. Knowing just collecting a lot of proper nouns and stuff.
Mm.
Um, and I think you then went on to describe that as an organic learning. And I think in your book, in your wonderfully crafted book, Creativity Unleashed, you mention it as unitive knowledge rather than just one kind of knowledge. It's I'm not sure because we have not spoken about this, Gopi, with each other. But last 11 years of what I've been on my journey, I've come across that even within the cognitive space, the cognitive sciences space, there are two streams now developing that want to depart from a very narrow definition of mind and narrow definition of where the mind is and what the mind does.
Mm.
And that's evolving towards what people are calling either the 4P cognition or the 4E cognition, which
Mm.
is, the 4E. You're aware of that, I believe. Uh, and it's interesting that your unitive idea is so close to this as an idea. Would you want to expand on something like this? Is something coming up for you?
I think originally, I think the essence of education was also to impart the ability to ponder, question, reflect, and be curious. Over the years, I think Cayman that changed quite drastically, and it became all about knowledge and being made job ready rather than life ready. Um, J. Krishnamurti says, if you show a child a tree and tell it the name of the tree, the child is never going to see that tree again. Right? So then it's like, oh, this is a gulmohar tree, and this is the trunk, and the leaves are green. What color are the leaves? The leaves are green. The flowers are orange, and that's it. And that's all the child is ever going to see again. And while I do not take away from the importance of knowing something, the knowledge, it takes you that far. Everything new has come out of that leap. The knowledge takes you that far, and then you are at the limit of what one knows, what you know, what humans know at that point in time. And all new discoveries have come out of that leap being made. And that leap is about connecting dots which were not connected earlier. The ability to make that connection, and in a deeply spiritual sense, if you were to kind of look at that realm, there's often a belief that in the vast storehouse of our consciousness, we actually know everything that we need to know in this moment. And many times it is about us getting out of the way for that to come forth. Right? So we are our own biggest obstacle. And contemplative practices, as you know yourself from your own experience, Hemant, are really about being able to get out of the way. It's about being able to silence the mind. Yes, the mind is important. It's a monkey, and it's got its job. And like a monkey, its job is to rush around from place to place. But there is something way beyond the mind that makes a lot of mind stuff really valuable. It takes the antics of the monkey and actually, over time, is able to produce something worthwhile out of it. I think it was Albert Einstein who said that in your entire life, if you have one new idea, you're a genius. So I think it is really, I mean, whether you call it, E4EP or, unitive mind, for me, it's really beyond the nomenclature, really, but about just being able to, almost at will, be able to tune in to that frequency of a force which is larger than oneself, whether it's God or universe or the cosmos. These are again words, but it's like just finding that frequency to tune into your favorite FM channel. A lot of buzz that can happen. You can hear a lot of noise and static, but the moment you find that frequency, boom, it's there. And many times, whatever you need to know in that moment is just transmitted to you effortlessly, and all you need to do is kind of get out of the way. So I think in my own, let's say, education, which was largely devoid of formal schooling, other skills which were around more human qualities, connection. And when I say connection, I don't necessarily mean with, just humans, but also with animals, with birds, plants, living beings, the energy of the world. These things were made visible to me. And the absence of the formal structures and the walls of a classroom actually facilitated my experiments with some of these spaces, energies. And of course, when I did, manage to gather some sort of formal education in my life, it actually became a very interesting confluence of both. Being able to read a P&L and a balance sheet, as well as being able to look at people and, being able to connect with them at another level, I think are the kind of skills that I was very privileged to gather in my education.
Interesting, very interesting. As you were sharing this, Gopi, what came up for me was there's this interesting psychiatrist out of UK. His name is Iain McGilchrist, and he wrote some interesting book bestseller. One of his recent bestseller has been titled as Master and His Emissary, where he's essentially talking about the left brain and the right brain as a metaphor again, just to convey the point. And his point is that, and I think it's so close to what you were mentioning, Gopi. So it's interesting that, you were arriving at through your insights and experiences, and there's a researcher arriving at from his. So he essentially is saying that there is one kind of this monkey mind that you're mentioning, which is reductionist in the here and now and just trying to get by the survival piece of it. But then there is the other, which is the spiritual or the more creative, more connected mind, which looks at relationships and the whole rather than the part. So it's an interesting thing that these things are converging in different geographies. So wonderful.
It is, Hemant. In fact, it's quite fascinating, and I often talk about this at another level as well, which is about, instinct, and intellect and intuition. We're all, equipped with all three. How does, a baby know how to cry when it's hungry? How do we automatically just lick ourselves when there's a nick? And that's just instinct, and that's at the level of the body. And there are cells which have a certain degree of intelligence, which are just making you do stuff. And that's an incredibly powerful thing in itself. And then, there's intelligence, which is boundless. And in many ways, I feel like the biggest obstacle to connecting with that boundless intelligence, which we see all the time around us in nature, is the intellect. And that is our monkey mind. And of course, intellect has also helped us, achieve and do a few useful things at best. But if you're able to go beyond the intellect and connect with intelligence, I think that's really where incredible stuff happens. And you just have to look into nature to see the levels of intelligence that are there in nature are something even science till today hasn't completely, or maybe will never completely figure out or be able to explain. And then you have intuition, which is, I don't even know what it is. Maybe it's some combination of all of these things and the absence of some of these things, which just makes that insight happen,
Yes.
right? So how do we hold space respectfully for each of these things and not get completely drowned or too identified with any one of them? And I think the biggest trap we have today, as a human being, is that we're identified with our thoughts. We identify ourselves as our thoughts. And that becomes the strongest sense of identity. So conscious thinking is the biggest drug known to man.
Beautiful.
We don't even realize that there is another level or another state, an altered state of consciousness, which is conscious without thinking. And there are some incredible things that happen over there. But unless you're able to experiment or at least playfully go into that state and just have a little bit of fun there, it's not something that you can learn through books. And I mean, we've all met a lot of people, I mean, who can read volumes and volumes on mindfulness or meditation and then still get very agitated. So this is experiential.
Correct. True that, Gopi. In fact, so here we are, Gopi, with all of this, and a wonderful thinker, E.O. Wilson, once mentioned. I believe the quote belongs to him, and I'll check before we put it out on the edit. I think he mentioned that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And here we are. And how important now then it becomes for contemplative practices to be installed. Much as we keep installing so many apps in our mobile phones every day, and so much also more important for leaders to do so. And you interact with so many leaders, Gopi, across geographies and disciplines and size of organizations. What are you sensing? What are you hearing them say over the last few months? Is there something that you can share as anecdotes or patterns that you're discovering?
Oh, for sure. And I think I would actually go a little further back in time than months to what happened, during and after COVID. Hemant, before COVID, I think, we all say the world was different, but how I mean it is that the importance of some of these things was just not understood in the same way. And I think there could have been, thousands of people like me, trying to make a case for mindfulness in workplaces, and that would have had its own trajectory. And then comes our, sales person, the pandemic, Mr. COVID, and then in 2 years, I think the way this space was altered was phenomenal, and I think that's one of the best things that probably came out of the pandemic. The willingness to actually embrace technology in support of mental health, the ability to see, having experienced the pandemic and the anxiety it caused, I think leaders became more empathetic about what well-being and mental health could be for a lot of people. I think earlier there was definitely a greater sense of, apathy towards some of these things, and leaders tended mostly to be more efficiency oriented, profit oriented, and these were considered to be, the softer things, not very important. So if you had some money left over, you would attend to well-being, soft skills, as many of these things are called. So that shift has definitely happened, I think, over the last few years, and that's really good. The other thing I think is now there's a lot more mainstream conversation around these things. Neuroscience has contributed significantly to an understanding of what these contemplative practices are able to do. There's a lot of scientific research that points to enhanced creativity, innovation, productivity, and even efficiency as a result of these practices. There are more studies that point to how workplace well-being actually improves employee retention, contributes towards work cultures, and helps companies build great places to work in. So that shift is definitely happening. We do a fair amount of work with companies, helping them build cultures of mindfulness, cultures of well-being, shape these conversations in good ways. And I certainly see that there has been a shift. Now, that said, these kind of things usually begin, at the top levels of the leadership, and the proof of the pudding eventually lies in its eating. So how does this intention really translate across the organization and over time effectively enough to create transformation? I think that's the key challenge a lot of leaders I speak with express. So it's like, how, the stuff is great. You come and you spend 2 days with us and, teach us stuff and talk to us, and that's great. And then, that effect stays for a while. But then how do we sustain this? And then how do we help take this to thousands of people in the organization and make it sustainable? And I say that it starts with intention. Right? So it's really good that you have the right intention behind it, because if you were just trying to do a tick in the box, maybe your approach would be entirely different. But if your intention is right, then there are ways in which this can be done. Today, there's technology, there's even AI coming in, and I kind of love that, because there's a whole space around AI and contemplative practices that I'm personally excited about. I see great possibilities there. So how do we, with awareness, with understanding, build out what can actually support people at scale?
Right.
I personally, at least for me, that's the holy grail I'm seeking at the moment.
I remember once Sanjeev Chopra, Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, he was the head of, he was the dean of Harvard Medical at one point, and he once, I don't know, jokingly or I believe not so jokingly, said that if you do not have 10 minutes to meditate, you need 20 minutes to meditate.
Mm.
So This talks about the urgent need or the pressing need for it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you find the following, Gopi, and I'm just stating it as fact, and maybe you can riff on it or build on it, which is you have some organizations across the world who've taken the lead in terms of promoting these practices in their workplaces. Google is one, and then SAP and other organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And very recently, just when the world is coming out of COVID, you saw a stream of layoffs happening in so many organizations. And there were questions being raised about, and also the way in which such things were brought about. Now, there are obviously, one can always look at one set of decision or action and then draw one's own subjective interpretation to it. So you can have subjectivity in how you interpret things. And no such action is dependent on only one factor, just because you are practicing contemplative practices does not mean you would not take tough decisions. In fact, all the more you need to take tough decisions. So how do you see this panning out? I'm not weighing in on any side, whether it was done right, wrong. Should you expect something like this from an organization? How would you read into these facts that have emerged in the media? Any early thoughts on them, Gopi?
I'll start with the Zen quote that says everybody should meditate for 20 minutes a day. And if you don't have time to do that, then you need to meditate for an hour.
So that's Dr. Sanjeev Chopra getting
Building
it from
on,
Zen,
yeah.
maybe.
Building on that, yeah. So, Hemant, how I see this is, personally, I don't see a dichotomy between these things. I don't see a conflict between these things. And I think at best, it's a paradox. I don't say at worst because I think paradoxes are beautiful. I love paradoxes personally, and I think life is a paradox. And we are not equipped with the skills to navigate this paradox. So then it starts to become stressful because then we see contradictions and conflict as bad. Contemplative practices, I think, allow us to create the quality of mind, a softness of mind that can see paradoxes, can see seemingly contradictory ideas coexisting. And again, I think it was the great man Einstein who said that true education is actually about being able to see two contradictory ideas without feeling the need to agree with either of them.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And I think this is what contemplative practices are truly about. This is what Zen is definitely about. This is what Zen koans are meant for. Have you heard the sound of one hand clapping? Is not meant for you to Google up or ask ChatGPT, try to find an answer to, because there isn't one. As much as it is designed for one to ponder and reflect, and in that reflection, that is the training. You build a certain quality of mind, a certain softness of mind, which is able to see different perspectives. And I often say this, that as much as we have come to value perception and clarity, perception and perspectives makes for wisdom. How do we also hold perspective for multiple viewpoints, conflicting, contradictory viewpoints, as much as there is value for perception? And it's when all of this comes together that it becomes wisdom. And in that state of wisdom, I think many times one is able to see things in different ways. So when you speak of layoffs, layoffs could have come from excesses. Layoffs could have come from business cycles. Layoffs can come from, market conditions and completely and acts of God, as we like to call them, right? They could come from one's lack of upskilling, perhaps, as well. So how do we develop at multiple levels as leaders, as people who have been laid off, as maybe people who survived the layoff? How do we develop the equanimity and the wisdom to be able to see all of this and then navigate it? Where one wave ends for a surfer is where another wave begins for somebody else. And that is the nature of life. So yes, layoffs can be difficult when they happen. Layoffs can be difficult for leaders, the people who laid off. But I think there is a certain upskilling that happens through the practice of, contemplative wisdom. That whether you're a leader or, the one being laid off or an observer to the whole thing, you're able to actually look behind the scenes without that whole emotional, contagion happening. And without necessarily getting into, the right and wrong of things, but just able to, I guess, surf that wave. Maybe it's big and maybe it's difficult and challenging, but yeah, you will learn to kind of work with it.
Beautiful.
So I don't know if that's, I'm not sure I even have a specific, I'm not sure I even heard a specific question within what you were saying. I think I felt like it was more of, something that we were just kind of exploring.
Yeah.
But how does that feel for you, Hemant?
Totally, completely resonate with it, Gopi. In fact, one of the things that the scribbles that I make, one of the things that's emerging for the last few years is almost in alignment with what you beautifully mentioned, dealing with paradoxes, dealing with conflict. In fact, I think I have written about it in terms of that we need to develop conflict intelligence and political intelligence. And one cannot do that if one gets too carried away, in your words, emotional contagion and, the overly reductionist right and wrong, which you don't want to revise. So beautiful, totally resonate with you, Gopi, on that. I also see this connected with the conversation you had, Gopi, with Shalini Prakash, because I remember that in the entire wonderful episode in the exchange between you and her, you arrived at a place which you obviously have arrived for a long time, and now you're trying to share it with others. Is that is the framing with the use of word problem and challenge. The moment you frame something as a problem or frame something as a challenge. And I'm so happy because the last few years I've been following a set of thinking in systems thinking space, in the complexity thinking space. And one of the core learning from that is that when you have a system with a lot of interacting parts, the interaction of the parts create, they occupy a state in the system. So the state can have n number of possibilities for the parts to have for what the parts can occupy. But given a certain time, it occupies a certain state. Now, with that state, you definitely have the distribution of resources and opportunities and outcomes and fairnesses and unfairnesses and pleasures and pain. But the moment you change the system, once the parts start interacting differently, it could come up with another set of outcome. So rather than seeing them as problem and solutions, to seeing them as states of a system, depending on how interactions are happening and what they're giving rise to.
Mhm.
And certainly with contemplative practices, as you mentioned, even in that episode, what your perspective building is different, your empathy is different, your emotional intelligence is different, and that gives you a very different understanding to how you're seeing the states being occupied, and then creatively, and that you also mentioned that lends to creativity in some interesting ways. So,
Mm.
so is this giving something that you want to speak about? Again, there is no question. We're just
Mm.
riffing on stuff. So yeah.
What comes up for me, Hemant, is that a problem is a problem only when you think it's a problem, right? And that's a saying, as old as the hills. But there's a lot of truth in it, in the sense that, like you beautifully articulated, I think when things shift, they create different states which have their own place and their own meaning. And for me, the question often becomes about how do we equip ourselves with the perspectives and the skills to be able to engage with these different states with both attachment and detachment. So not being too attached to something that we are unable to just see anything else, but not being so detached that we, just completely miss it when it goes by. I think there's this nice level of tension that can exist. And in a sense, I think the ability to kind of exist in that state over a period of time actually becomes a trait. And then one is in, let's say, one can be in a constant state of wonderment at how things operate. And then you're like, oh, wow, oh, wow, that shifted. And that can be such an amazing trait because it's become permanent. States are more temporary, right? And so that trait allows you to see these shifting states with curiosity, with wonderment, with amazement, and marvel at how things work. Um, and just being in that state, in that or developing that trait, that skill, and being in that state is so conducive to creativity and problem solving, idea generation and innovation. And so then, it's really interesting, even in neuroscience, um, they see that the brain operates at different frequencies, right? Typically, we're in a state of beta, which is, whatever, 14 to 20, 14, 16 to about 28 cycles per second. And that's the normal state most people are in. And we have alpha, which is a little lower, 8 to 14 cycles per second, hertz. And that's the state of mindfulness where most creativity happens, light meditation. Then you have theta, which is sleep, deep meditation, and that is corresponding to roughly 4 to 8 cycles per second. And then you have delta, which is deep sleep, 0 to 4 cycles per second. And of course, you don't have less than 0 because you'd be clinically, brain dead, electrical activity would stop. But here's the beautiful thing. There is an, pardon me, there is another level of gamma, which is what happens at the moment of insight. When you get your aha, there's a blip in the brain and it suddenly shows heightened activity. But that lasts for a split second. Right? Now, what neuroscientists have found is that for seasoned meditators, people with over 10,000, let's say, hours of lifetime meditation, contemplative practices, gamma states can extend to longer periods of time. So where for mere mortals like us, perhaps it's just a split second, for these guys, they can exist in that state. And can you imagine now, if you are in that state of insight, what problems would look like to you?
Beautiful.
You'd just be walking around, going, oh wow, this, and oh wow, that. And we've seen this in people. I mean, I've worked with some phenomenally creative people in my life all over the world, and I've seen this inherent, like, oh my God, look at that. And then they're just seeing something else in it, right? So this is kind of how I see it, and I think we all have the ability to train ourselves to exist in these states, if not develop it as a quality and as a trait, right? Over a long period of time, I think it can actually become a trait, but can we spend time in that state? For sure. So then instead of going around thinking, oh my God, this is a problem, and oh my God, that's another problem, we can actually see this shift that you're talking about, these parts moving, and the dynamic that it produces as, wow, opportunities.
Wonderful, wonderful, Gopi. Let me segue it from the gamma thing that you mentioned. It's such a beautiful way you described it, and you talked about it being sustained then for the lesser mortals when it's just for a split second. There is this idea of sustained state, moving from one sustained the abstract of sustained there to the sustenance of such practices. So just before this call, I had a brief call with Shri, and I was just generally jamming, and I wanted to know from him, can we put out some curiosities that some of our listeners might have? And he gave two wonderful queries, and if we can, integrate it in this interaction, Gopi. So one of the curiosities that she beautifully highlighted was, and this is, by the way, it connects very beautifully so my very first interview that I did was of Chedmeng Tan in 2017 in this video series. And I remember very clearly Meng mentioning that when people would read Search Inside Yourself book, they would come up to him and congratulate, and all of those things would happen. But then when Meng would ask, oh wow, and then how's the practice? And then everybody would be, they all had difficulty having sustained practice. And so she had a similar curiosity that he felt, others would have. Do you get asked about the idea of how do you get disciplined about mindfulness, and are there anything that you can speak to it as in the initial terms?
Oh, for sure. This is probably one of the most commonly asked questions. How quickly can I become an expert? Yeah. And I said to someone, 5 years. And then they were like, no, that's way too long. I'll work twice as hard. And, then what happens? Then I said, it takes 10 years in that.
The harder you try, the longer it gets.
Yes. Yeah, but that said, I mean, honestly, Hemant, I think there are a couple of things here. One is that there's no substitute for practice. And it's like learning a new skill. I mean, we took what, I forget now, but babies take what, 6 months to learn how to walk?
Yeah, more than that. I don't know.
More than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a long time since I had one, so I've kind of forgotten. But I suspect 6 months to 12 months is probably how long they take before they, start crawling to when they start walking. So we take 12 months to learn how to walk. How much time are we prepared to devote to something like this? There's no substitute for hard work. There's no substitute for practice. Is it like learning a language? It's like learning a musical instrument. It's like learning a sport. You have to put in the hours. But that said, what's the most common excuse that people have these days? I don't have time. And that's where mindfulness completely demolishes their excuse. Because to practice mindfulness, you do not need any extra time, right? Every moment actually gives you an opportunity to practice it. So you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to go to the mountains or go to a monastery, stand on one leg somewhere, grow a long beard, nothing. Moment by moment by moment, life is allowing you to practice it. And you just need to learn how. And so if you can learn that, I think you're setting yourself up in a really good way. Because then, yes, you do get to go, once in a while to the beach and, sit there and go to the mountains and sit there and stuff like that. But on an everyday basis, you can also speak with your boss and have difficult conversations and, drive the car and have your coffee and practice mindfulness while you're doing all of that. And I think that's the paradigm shift that needs to happen for people. And when that does happen, then there's a liberating sort of aha moment that I have seen. And people will come back and say, you know what, wow, now I get it. Right. I speak of this in a certain sense of, this is like cycling. Now, what happens when you cycle? If we look at it as a series of micro movements, you actually sit on a cycle and you push forward and you take your foot off the ground and you put it on the pedal. And once you do that, you actually start falling in one direction. And then you correct that, and then you start falling in the other direction. And then you correct that, and you start falling in this direction again. And then you correct that, and you start falling in that direction again. So you're constantly making a series of micro corrections. But the most important thing is you're moving forward. Because if you stop moving forward, those micro corrections will not work. Right? So you keep moving forward, making those micro corrections. And what is the overall effect? It's one of beautiful balance on something this thin, going at a good speed, right? So it's the same thing with the mind, that it wanders and you bring it back, and it wanders to the next thing and you bring it back, and then it wanders to the next thing and you bring it back, and so on and so on and so on. And you keep doing it moment after moment after moment after moment. You're moving forward. The net effect that you create is one of balance.
Beautiful, Gopi. Beautiful. I think that's a wonderful wonderful way that you explained using bicycle, because in the micro, falling in the micro correction is the movement, and nothing else can give that.
Yeah, people mistake this often as, having to, go to a monastery, and they tell me, oh, but you've been there. And it's like, okay, you don't always need trainer wheels to start cycling, right? Some of you are fortunate, you have somebody, who's not put on trainer wheels for you, so you start moving. So you don't need to, always do it the same way. Of course, it's certainly helpful. Going to a monastery has its own, benefits. You get to learn more than just bicycling, but yeah, you get to learn to do wheelies. How can you ride a bicycle on one wheel? But then you don't need that. In regular life, you need to just know how to ride it. And for that, you don't need to go there. You just need to form this, system of practicing.
Right. With whatever we exchanged, Gopi, I looking at my sheet, and as you were sharing the bunch of things that have come up, and I believe that it's going to take some more time for us to do that. Maybe we'll try and schedule again and do another round of interaction where you would try and cover some of these. So maybe it demands that we do it another episode, and I would invite you to co-hold this space and do that with me.
For sure, Hemant, if that feels appropriate, be more than happy to have the conversation. Like I said, I always have wonderful conversations with you, and would completely welcome and embrace the opportunity to do this one more time.